In a post-Cold War world of shrinking space budgets, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, was challenged to reinvent itself. The lab's new assignment from NASA: land safely on Mars in a revolutionary new way.
Mars is the hardest planet to land on, and I want you to do it cheaply.
But could it be done? And who was brave or foolish enough to sign up for such a risky mission?
Nobody else wanted the job. They were afraid to death of it.
The rest of the lab was going, what are these guys doing? Because all they could see is the most embarrassing failures possible.
Added to the challenges was the addition of an unexpected passenger.
That silly little rover. It was not popular with anybody.
Command error. What's going on now? What's broken now? This thing's falling apart on me.
If you crash, you're going to crash and burn big time.
You're not allowed to fail. Don't you dare fail. Do whatever you need to do, but don't fail.
The Pathfinders. JPL and the Space Age. Next. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, marking the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War,
2, 1.
and the beginning of a decade of shrinking budgets for America's space program. And that meant major changes, declared the new head of NASA, Dan Goldin.
It is scary. I can't promise that everything's going to be okay.
To the shock of many, Goldin predicted that the space agency's very survival was in doubt unless it embraced change.
But I can promise that if we go for the survival mode, as an agency in 5 years, we're dead. So let me walk you through some of the issues.
Goldin delivered the same message at JPL.
Never ever go back. JPL will never ever look like it did. You will not build very many spacecraft that look like this. You got to erase that from your mind.
I remember his first meeting with the JPL Executive Council, and he was no nonsense. He said, you know, when I come out to JPL, I see 6,000 people all clustered around a single spacecraft. He said, that's not the way to do business. That's Battlestar Galactica, and there aren't going to be any more Battlestar Galacticas.
When I came here the first few times, it was with malice aforethought that I did everything.
But let me give you some evidence.
They were too cautious, so I used some theatrics.
The Mars Surveyor was supposed to be faster, better, cheaper. Gravity works. This is not the way to do things. There is no excuse for all this paper in that package. And what this package called out is the famous JPL Procurement Forms Manual. Now, do you want to spend your remaining days in the space program dealing with garbage like this? Who has the courage to say that this is unnecessary? This is not what we're about. We're about leaving Earth. We're not about paper. Just because
there was a strategy behind Goldin's theatrics. He wanted JPL to show how all of NASA could approach its work differently in the post-Cold War world. A concept Goldin called faster, better, cheaper.
Part of his charge was, in fact, to oversee the transition of the agency to a new direction, new scale missions, and science in particular.
The Jet Propulsion Lab is going to be the catalyst to change the whole NASA space program.
So I was trying to understand exactly what kinds of things he was trying to promote and how we could then make them real. Our job was to make them real.
Everyone's tired of the shuttle going up and down. It's boring.
My words was I wanted to darken the skies with a lot of satellites and spacecraft, and I wanted the American people to share in the excitement. And the first thing they did was the Mars Pathfinder. Brilliant. Brilliant.
That's what we agreed to. We had a
Golden
contract
was not
on that
alone in
budget
his
and
desire for
won.
change.
And to revolutionize spacecraft development in a way to drastically reduce cost while maintaining the capability.
Wes Huntress was a former JPL scientist. He was now at NASA headquarters in charge of solar system missions and showing no hint of favoritism for the lab where he had worked for 2 decades.
JPL was incredibly upset at me. They were so mad because I gave a mission to someone other than JPL. JPL felt at the time, we're the planetary program, we're going to do all the flight missions, we should do all the flight missions because nobody else can do them like us. How could you possibly give a mission to somebody else? And the answer was real simple, and that's because your proposed cost was way too high. In the area of planetary exploration,
With JPL's attention now fully engaged, Huntress offered up a challenge.
JPL will give you a hard one because you're good at hard ones. And that's landing something on Mars. And I want you to do it cheaply.
Mars Pathfinder, as it came to be called, was to be a technology demonstration. The goal, proving that it was possible to land on Mars using airbags.
And there was really no basis for knowing whether we could do it or not. We had no experience in that area. But we knew that if we didn't sign up for it, somebody who had less to lose than we did would sign up for it, and we might just deal ourselves out of the game. So we said, of course we can.
The new coin of the realm are technology milestones. To establish those
Huntress had
technology
another
milestones,
requirement.
define this new
He wanted to
capability
name the
required
project
to complete these
manager.
exciting new missions. And when that technology, there's only one person at JPL that can do this, only one. And that's Tony Spear, because he's a maverick.
Tony Spear was a JPL veteran, well known for being gregarious, enthusiastic, and forthright.
I never felt like I belonged to JPL, ever, okay? I came from a steel-working mining family, you know, and when I was just overwhelmed by JPL. And so I had to bust my butt all the while. I was incredibly intimidated. I couldn't understand one word that was being spoken. And I took acronyms home, lists of acronyms. Every night I would study these things, you know.
Spear's inherent optimism, combined with feelings of being an outsider, would serve him well. He was being asked to land on Mars on a tight schedule of 4 years, with a budget less than a tenth of what the first NASA landings, the Vikings, had cost 2 decades earlier.
Nobody else wanted the job, Mars Pathfinder. They were afraid to death of it. They were saying, you know, you're a crazy ass, Spear, for taking it. What are you going to do? And instead of being afraid, I don't know why, I got excited. I thought, oh my God, you know, I'm climbing mountains and I'm doing this and that. And I says, I'll take it.
I will be a very close monitor of the time. Tony, you have 10 minutes. We got a 10-minute late start, so I expect you to make it all up.
John says he didn't care what I said, just get done in 10 minutes. Actually, I'm young. I was good looking before I started this. This is what happens. Here's one experiment coming up. We got this thing, and now we got to do it. And Pathfinder, his major objective is to demonstrate a low-cost delivery system for landing things on Mars, okay? And we use a Viking parachute. We use a Viking-like aeroshell. We use automobile-like airbags. We use Russian.
I would show the simulation of the balls bouncing. And everybody in the room would laugh. They would giggle. Oh, my God, give me a break.
Anyway, how am I doing, John? How much time? 5 more minutes. Good. Okay.
I was thinking all the while, how the hell do you land on a planet? I had no idea.
Some of the original ideas for an airbag landing were these back-of-the-envelope sketches. As the plan envisioned, Pathfinder dives into the Martian atmosphere at 16,000 miles per hour. Protected by its heat shield, the spacecraft burns through the Martian atmosphere, reducing its speed to 900 miles per hour. Next, a parachute is deployed. Then the heat shield and back shell are jettisoned, and a rope drops to detect the ground. The airbags inflate. Seconds later, the lander hits the surface at 50 miles per hour, bouncing stories high. After the lander finally comes to rest, the airbags deflate, and an antenna rises up, transmitting back to Earth the news that the lander is, somehow, still in one piece. One of Spear's first challenges was finding people willing to sign on for what seemed to many a career-ending mission.
It wasn't easy to form that team. But once we got it, man, did they rock and roll.
He created a skunk works, and he brought together young engineers who were not steeped in the flagship way of doing things yet. And the combination of these young, innovative engineers and the old sage, or the wise old sage, turned out to work beautifully. JPL hated it.
Nobody really wants to work on this. We don't think it's gonna work. You know, we need somebody to fill this job. Will you go do it? But to me, I'm in my mid-20s. I want kind of that adventurous, let's try new things, let's conquer the world spirit. And so I didn't think twice, you know, it sounded great. Plus I didn't have a job.
I was young enough and ignorant enough, I didn't know and I didn't really care. The camaraderie and the esprit de corps was tremendous.
I liked working with Tony. He was very direct, but if he thought you knew what you were doing, he let you do your job.
It was the most fun project I've ever worked on. But I also remember this little, Jiminy Cricket in the back of your head saying, you're a scientist, why are you working on a mission that is not a science mission, right? It's a technology demonstration. What good is that? You've sold out.
I was new to the lab and I was naive. This was just one other new thing to do.
Like that. This is the carrier. The rest of the lab was going, oh my God, what are these guys doing? Literally, there are people who wouldn't speak to me. My colleagues who were just like, you know, I can't talk to you about this. It's just making me sick to my stomach. Because all they could see is the most embarrassing failures possible. Nothing good could come out of Pathfinder. Nervous.
So that was just, you know, an incredible gamble for all of those young kids. You know, my career was already established and over pretty much, but all those young kids I worried about, you know.
The team wasn't entirely on its own. They had the full support of JPL's upper management. Veterans of the Viking mission provided tough but often useful guidance. And technical components from JPL's current Battlestar Galactica, Cassini, were incorporated into the mission, helping to keep Pathfinder from busting its budget. Minimizing bureaucracy helped to keep down the costs, too.
We dumped paperwork that we just didn't think was necessary. We made sure we had the right paper.
It was dramatically underfunded, and it was understaffed. And what that created was tremendous opportunity. So if you got the right kind of person, and they saw a job that needed doing, and they had the ability to go, they just went and did it.
faster, better, cheaper missions are like race cars. You got to have one hell of a pit crew behind you, and you need a really good driver. But if you crash, you're going to crash and burn big time.
And early on, there were some minor crashes. One involved an unusual test of the lander's aeroshell.
So we had an engineer who basically had the idea, he was a parachutist by hobby, and so he had decided we're going to take a subscale version of this out, you know, of the heat shield, of the forebody, and the parachute, and I'm just going to throw it out the back of a plane. And then I'm going to jump after it, and I'm going to take pictures on the way down. It's very interesting given JPL of today, right? You can edit all this out.
The aeroshell, weighing over 200 pounds, almost immediately began tumbling out of control. Then the main parachute failed to open. A second parachute did unfurl, but it was attached to the heat shield. Meanwhile, the aeroshell smashed into the ground at an estimated speed of over 200 miles per hour.
What happened? I think what happened is the static line attachment broke, because he had the brake cord has to pull the canopy out.
This is difficult and even embarrassing for us.
Later, there was a second air mishap. A legendary one for which, unfortunately, there is no footage. It is remembered as the Pathfinder UFO. The story begins when a commercial contractor, while conducting a parachute test, accidentally dropped lead weights over a cucumber farm.
One of the local newspapers had talked about a UFO incident about when a cucumber farmer found a lead weight from potentially a UFO embedded in his truck. So that started the whole story. And it was funny the way your reactions went. So my reaction was, shh, let's not talk about it. It's a UFO incident, it's a UFO incident. And finally our management said, there is no way you can't talk about this. We have to come clean.
We made the farmer very happy. We bought him a new truck, and we promised him that for his daughter's birthday, we would fly over with a happy birthday sign. Now Caltech is really worried. What are you doing, Spear?
Reining in the younger members of the team was one of the responsibilities of Brian Muirhead, a likable but hard-nosed technical leader.
Would somebody pay attention to the management?
Brian was total nuts and bolts, get it done kind of a guy. And so that absolutely is what Tony had to have, was somebody like that who could be his person to go off and clean up all the messes.
If this is the surface of the atmosphere, we're coming in and we have to...
I had never been a flight system manager. I had delivered, sizable things at the lab, but nothing like the flight system of a spacecraft. And it's the people that came around me on the flight system team we kind of accreted a team of radical kind of thinkers.
Muirhead was open to new ideas, but they had to be subjected to tried and true methods of proof.
Which is build it, test it, break it, fix it, do it again.
But not everything could be fully tested.
I was very scared of the parachute, I gotta tell you. Mostly was that the parachute was the one thing we couldn't test in any realistic way.
Assuming the parachute worked, the next challenge was knowing when to inflate the airbags, just seconds before hitting the ground. The original idea of hanging a rope with a sensor at the bottom proved unworkable. So radar was added, but that solution raised new problems.
The devil's in the details. That's where I got into the picture, was in the devil's in the details. Like, for example, in some of the drop tests, we do drop tests on parachutes, and the radar was dropping and taking measurements, and it was swinging, like you would imagine that it would be swinging, and then we realized that the radar, when it loses lock, it has all these horrible altitude measurements that the radar tells you these are good measurements, but they are really bad.
To increase the chance of a safe landing, rockets were added in hopes of further slowing down the lander.
So there was a set of steps we went through where smart people thought about how to make it more reliable, but it just kind of added more to the, here's something that goes into this basket and then that basket dumps into this tray. I mean, so it really gives you that Rube Goldberg sort of a feeling.
Then there were the airbags.
There we go. It's rolling off. It's going the wrong way.
I remember working with Sandia. They had the most powerful computer in the world at that time. And we brought it to its knees trying to simulate this airbag.
In the early 1990s, computer processing capability was just getting good enough that we could imagine really bringing all of these simulation programs together. But there were certain parts of it we came to realize you really couldn't treat very well with a computer simulation. The airbags being by far and away the foremost example.
I would guess that we didn't understand 90% of the fundamental physics that goes into the airbag. However, I would also argue that we didn't understand 50% at the end of Pathfinder.
We're in the world's largest vacuum chamber, and we had the bags all the way up to the ceiling. It still wasn't enough distance to drop and get to the 23 meters per second impact velocity that we wanted. That's about 55, almost 60 miles an hour. So we had to design an acceleration system. Release. And when we released it, they just flew down like a bat out of hell and slammed into the platform and onto these huge rocks. And, our worst fears were realized, and we got a pretty big tear in the bag.
I don't think we cried. I came close to have tears in my eyes. There was one test in particular. We said, okay, there's a way to solve this. Just kill it. Let's put a 800 denier canvas on this thing. Nobody could tear into that. Put it on there. Release. Dropped it. Gaseous. Tore the airbags lobe to lobe. And that was the moment that both of us thought, we may not make this. We may not launch this. They did develop a tick, even sort of like this. I used to think I could control it, but every time I wasn't paying attention, it would be going like this.
Despite the pressures, the engineering challenges were shaping the team into a tight-knit group. And they were having fun.
The way to do this is to not have rules for building a team. This is what teamwork's all about. Oh, I love my team. What can I say? I mean, they're...
But with no small irony, the lander team soon found themselves in a reversal of roles. They would be the insiders to a whole new group of maverick outsiders, wanting to hitch a ride to Mars. Long before Pathfinder, scientists had dreamt of machines roaming the surface of Mars. They would be robotic geologists, examining and collecting rocks to unlock the secrets of the planet's ancient past. But the early prototypes were massive and impractical.
Rovers needed big computers because they had to do all these calculations to keep themselves safe. So one-way light time delay, you can't joystick a vehicle on the surface. So you need to be able to put in hazard detection and avoidance. And at that time, those needed big computers. And that made a big rover, and so the rovers kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
This behemoth, called Robbie, weighed in at nearly a ton, earning it, and others like it, the nickname Godzilla.
And we kept going, there's no way you could make one of these function on Mars. You know, the computers were too big.
But as computers began shrinking, so did rover prototypes. And now there was a political motivation for becoming serious about a rover on Mars. Russia had its own ambitions for a rover.
Talk about some specific projects.
But as part of the Cold War thaw, Russian space officials were treated to a tour of JPL and a status briefing. The Russians reciprocated with a rover fest on JPL's mall.
A month or so ago, the head of the Russian Space Agency, Mr. Kovkev, was here, and we showed him Rocky, but we wanted to have more substantive technical discussions with people and try to get some information exchange going.
Donna Shirley was the team leader for JPL's rovers. She was also JPL's first female aerospace engineer.
I got a lot of teasing and everything, but at the time, people were not interested in whether you were green or purple or blue or female or male or whatever. They were mainly interested, could you get the job done? The only thing really bad about it was that everybody smoked cigars in those days, and so they were literally smoke-filled rooms when you went to a meeting. There were other women at JPL who were doing technical work, but they were running these mechanical calculators. And these women were called computers, because in order to do these complex navigational calculations, they would run these calculators, ching, ching, like a bunch of slot machines all running at the same time. And if they were taking square roots, it would be absolutely deafening in there, because they would. So they did all the complex calculations, but they weren't engineers for the most part. Most of them didn't have degrees. They just were smart women.
Throughout Shirley's life, Mars kept appearing. Her introduction began as a child, reading works of science fiction.
Pretty much assume that either you know something...
And now she was the champion for a Martian rover, but finding the assignment a hard sell.
And so when we say we have 25...
And the scientists said, oh, that silly little rover, what on earth can it do? It can't do anything useful, because they were used to the idea of a very large rover that would go 100 kilometers around Mars and collect lots of samples.
And the lander talks to us, and the lander has the hard job of getting the data back.
As part of her pitch, she could point to a recent test that had put a rover named Rocky through its paces in the Pasadena Arroyo. Rocky began the workout by descending from a makeshift lander to the ground. Then it dropped off a simulated seismometer to detect Martian earthquakes. Next, the rover made its way to a rock, where a small hammering device was to chip away at the stone's exterior. But here, Rocky experienced a major malfunction. All of these vibrations caused the rover's computer to lock up, leaving the rover pecking away in an endless loop. This glitch required a manual computer reset.
Okay, we're ready to go. Launch. Okay, here we go.
After the reboot, having regained its senses, Rocky picked up a soil sample and ambled its way back and up onto the lander.
Something about the rover is part of Measure Pathfinder, and we're a flight experiment, whereas Pathfinder...
Once skeptical scientists were beginning to see real possibilities.
This is just to give you an idea of this. It gives me a hard
To Shirley's delight and Spear's dismay, NASA directed JPL to give the rover a ride to Mars.
Your customer.
If a project manager is trying desperately to do something that nobody's ever done before for an incredibly small amount of money, and somebody comes up to him and says, gee, I want you to carry along this completely extraneous thing. Well, it looks to him like a parasite. And so it was not popular with anybody.
Something about it. If you'll shut up for a minute,
What?
I'll say something about it. I think that actually...
The funding for the rover came from a separate NASA pot. So Donna was appointed to be the project manager of the rover.
The effort that these people
That immediately created this slightly two-headed monster where Tony thought he was in charge and Donna had a similar feeling about it, and she was not going to let him tell her what to do, and he was going to treat her like a second-class citizen at some level. And that sort of animosity between the rover team and the quote lander team, it lasted for quite a while.
Stories of their yelling bouts were legendary. And the tension between these two headstrong managers only worsened when Shirley was promoted to also manage a newly established Office of Mars Exploration.
Which meant Tony Spear, now worked for her. All hell broke loose.
Besides a personality clash, there were difficult technical issues involved in accommodating Sojourner, as the rover was named. And it would still be Spear, as the Pathfinder project manager, who would recommend whether or not the rover would actually get a ride to Mars.
That was a solar-powered mission. The inside of the panels had the solar rays. We were going to take up space, volume, and real estate that had to be tucked in there. And of course, the ramps. The ramps were a big, huge development activity to make these very lightweight, flexible ramps that would roll out off the edge of the tetrahedron panels.
When we got to the point where we were doing environmental testing, we were in the chamber, and the rover couldn't handle the cold temperature. So they built this little literally a doghouse for the rover over on the side, so the rover could crawl into it while we were doing cold temperature testing on the lander, and it could basically be protected. The first time that the rover drove out, those pieces of tape confused the onboard algorithms, and so it literally was afraid to drive, out onto the floor. And so the lander guys, all thought it was hysterical that here's this rover that, is going to drive around Mars and it can't even figure out a way to drive in the flat chamber floor of Building 150.
Another source of contention early on was whether the rover should operate autonomously, as the rover team wanted, or should it be tethered to the mothership for power and communication.
This one manager at NASA, I would go back and brief. He was listening to me, and I'm up, walking around with my microphone, and I'm getting caught up in the cord. He says, "Look at Tony Spear and his rover getting caught up in the tether." He disavows, by the way, that he ever did that. So I was getting nowhere with them. And one night, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, where a lot of decisions happened. I realized, man, do you have a good team. I came in the next morning, I'm thinking, damn, I have the solution. And I say, I will let you do the rover without the tether. They were stunned. What I realized at 3 o'clock in the morning, if I chose their approach, they were going to bust their butt to prove to me that I made the right decision. And it just happened like a flash. Hey, that's the answer. Get over it, Tony. Just do it.
With just 1 year remaining before the launch of Pathfinder, members of the team put aside their hectic schedules to take a field trip to a place as close to Mars as exists on Earth.
I thought it was a bit of a potential for boondoggle. I had a lot to do, and I didn't think I had time. But Matt Golombek says, "Rob, you gotta go. You gotta go."
As project scientist, you have to figure out where to land. And no one had done that since the Viking missions years before. How do you go about making a decision that's so important? Because you're not just throwing a dart, that you want to pick a place that has the greatest chance for success. If it's not safe, it doesn't matter what science you think you're going to get.
Golombek's recommendation was to land on an ancient floodplain. And here on Earth, he was bringing Pathfinder engineers to a place that had once experienced a similar geologic event. This is the Scablands in eastern Washington state, a mostly barren region that experienced an almost unimaginably massive flood at the end of the last ice age.
Why is this important? Well, because where we were going on Mars is a place where clearly we could see that billions of years ago, water coursed over the surface of Mars in exactly the same sort of cataclysmic flow of water. The place we were landing at was going to be at least 10 times more dramatic, where even hundreds of feet high water, miles across, raced down the mountain and just completely altered the surface over the matter of hours and days. Billions of years ago. We finally could visualize what the surface of Mars would look like. We could see the boulders and the rocks that had been formed in those conditions. We could see what the airbags had to handle. And Matt Golombek saying, "This is what it's gonna look like!" And so, there's a lot of rocks here, man. He says, "Yeah, that's right. We're going to Mars. We're going for rocks." And he says, "Yes, okay, great."
The landing guys are going, "But these are sharp rocks." It was great fun.
And by the way, when you're this high above the ground as a rover, rocks this big are really scary.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to NASA headquarters and what promises to be a very
Interest in Martian rocks went sky high a year later when NASA Administrator Dan Golden set the stage for a controversial announcement: the discovery of possible evidence that life once existed on Mars.
First, the results today are not conclusive, or there is not yet scientific consensus. We're not here to establish, as in a courtroom, beyond the shadow of doubt that life existed on Mars. But we're here today to open the door just a little bit. And we may see the first evidence that life might have existed beyond the confines of this small planet, the third rock from the sun.
The clues came from a rock that was blasted off the Martian surface by a meteor that hit the planet millions of years ago. After roaming the solar system, it too became a meteor when it entered Earth's atmosphere. This remnant landed in the Antarctic. Scientists found inside the rock structures interpreted by some to be microfossils of lifelike bacteria. The announcement caused a media sensation.
As a thrilling discovery, a doorstep to the heavens, the possibility of life on Mars.
It also gave NASA a new argument for sending more missions to Mars. Over and over, the stakes for Pathfinder were raised. A mission originally conceived as only a demonstration of a new way of landing on Mars had become the poster child to prove faster, better, cheaper could work. Then room had to be made for a pesky and demanding rover. And now, with the announcement of the Mars rock, NASA's hopes to expand its exploration of the planets was riding on board Pathfinder 2. Failure, Spear was told, was no longer an option.
And I told everybody, you know, failure is okay, except on Pathfinder. I said to Tony Spear, you're not allowed to fail. Don't you dare fail. Do whatever you need to do, but don't fail.
The pressures on the Pathfinder team continued mounting all the way up to launch. By then, Spear had said yes to yet one more new requirement.
Do you want to land on the 4th of July? I said, let's go for it. What the hell? If we're going to splat, let's really splat.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, green board, 5, 4, 3, main engine start, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Delta rocket with Mars Pathfinder. And the vehicle has cleared the tower.
The launch was picture perfect. And as Pathfinder emerged from the shadow of the Earth, the spacecraft sent out the message that its solar panels were charging. For some unknown reason, though, the spacecraft's sun sensor, vital for navigation, was failing to see the sun.
Working better than I expected, and I don't understand it right now. I need to analyze it. Because we're getting out of the sun sensor field of view right now.
Yeah.
Without the sun sensor to help with navigation, the spacecraft would never reach Mars.
And I hear our colleagues saying, you know, I see the sun in the solar arrays, and they are interrogating me, ACS, do you see any sun yet? I said, no, negative.
No, we're getting out of the sun sensor field of view right now.
You're pointing, what, 30 anomaly?
And then I hear, you know, talking around, well, we see the sun, you know, and then I realize at that point, you know, I get, you know, this cold sweat.
I'd like to report that the tilt is about 3.4 degrees.
The problem was surmised to be debris sticking to the sun sensor. That would have occurred when the spacecraft separated from the final stage of the launch vehicle.
Yeah. Can you report the temperatures listed in the procedure?
So there was this anomaly with the launch vehicle. This goop goes on the sun sensors, and we're looking and watching the data in the MSA.
Do you have the telemetry you need to?
It never went to sun. It just said no sun, no sun, no sun, no sun, no sun. You know, being rocket scientists, we're like, we think the sun is there. We think that the sun sensors just aren't seeing it.
The estimated spin rate is all screwed up, especially with the sun sensor glitch.
Fortunately, one of the few backup instruments on Pathfinder was a second sun sensor. But to switch to it required sending up a software patch.
I'm on console as a flight director, and I send the first bundle of software to the spacecraft, and it worked fine, great. Then I do another one. Didn't work. what? Do it again. Didn't work. It gets rejected. Command error. That's strange. What's going on now? What's broken now? This thing's falling apart on me.
Okay, now...
The files were finally loaded on board by the peculiar solution of lowering the data transmission rate. Had the fix not worked, Pathfinder would have been lost in the first few weeks of a 7-month journey to Mars. During cruise, the makeup of the Pathfinder team changed. Some members moved on to other missions. Others stayed on to rehearse surface operations. Whatever divisions there had once been between rover and lander teams were now long past, and the lab as a whole was showing more support for its Maverick mission.
An interesting thing happened. Everybody who felt that this was a mistake and that it wasn't going to work and yada, 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 when you get to the launch pad, there's no reason for anybody to not want it to succeed. All of a sudden, everybody's your friend.
Instrument data looks good so far.
Roger, are you in entry mode?
We are in
And the wind science is set to low?
Yes.
Friday morning, the 4th of July, 1997.
Charge limiter. Cruise solar array panels.
1 hour remained before the beginning of EDL, entry, descent, and landing.
Hey, Mr. Flight Director and Mr. Flight Software.
Yeah, we would
go ahead. Got a question for you over here. There's some concern as to maybe the possibility that the patch might not have worked properly. Is it valid?
The message that came down from the spacecraft in telemetry said, you're on the old version of software.
Is it valid for us to try and do a dump of the scum table and surface normal? I mean, if we got to do it, we have to do it fast before we actually do crew state separation. That's like the only way we can verify the patch actually made it. Comments?
And of course, this was the software that nobody wanted to use, and we had not fully tested before launch, and so everybody panicked.
That's not going to happen.
It's not even that important. Let's not do it.
Get it ready. I don't want to say that, but I do want to know that we are at least in the patch version of flight software.
I mean, it's something with the hardware interaction. And what else is there? And this is in the last hour, right? It's like, let's reset the spacecraft and make sure we're running the right version of software. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that unless we have no other choice.
The only command I could even conceive of sending is to set channel params to force those channels down. And if we do that, we don't have any action to take after that anyway. We don't have any time. So
we were worried about it to the last minute. We're looking at the telemetry data coming back. And my mission director, he's looking at the data and he's becoming worried. And CNN's cameras are blaring. We're all trying to smile. I says, look, how could you do this at this time?
And that explains the last one. Yeah, what are the ones of the last one? What about these? Are the boot.
The team knew the original software was full of errors. If it was still running, the mission was likely doomed. Hoping to determine what version of the code was on board, the engineers began scanning their files, looking for filler bits of information that had been added to the latest version of the software. Those bits included, as a memorial, the name of a JPLer who had recently died. They found his name, confirming the right software was loaded on the spacecraft. Another crisis was averted. But other issues kept coming.
That just took 3/4 of my downlink power.
Yes, I understand.
You know, where's Rob? That is not good. That's not good.
This is the Mars Pathfinder Flight Director. We are currently approximately 15 minutes away from crew stage separation. All telemetry continues to look nominal.
CDLCOM reports spacecraft ranging channel off event.
EDL telecom reports cruise stage separation.
All right, this is the Mars Pathfinder flight director. We have confirmed that cruise stage separation has occurred. All right, we will now pass EDL operations to our chief engineer and entry descent landing lead, Rob Manning, who will report the real-time EDL status.
Really, there's these few minutes where everybody wants to know what's happening, and you just don't. It's scary, and at the same time, it's exciting as hell.
The spacecraft now is about 7,500 kilometers above the surface of Mars. It's still traveling at about 7.4 kilometers per second. Very fast.
We were all apprehensive. There are so many things that could have gone wrong, and everything had to go right.
30 seconds till entry. The spacecraft is now slowing down very rapidly. We expect that the parachute will deploy in about 15 seconds. Parachute should now be deployed. Lander separation should have occurred right about now. Airbag should be inflated.
At least signal is coming in and out of the spectrum. Yeah. I'll do that. Yeah. I believe I have a firm signal.
I won the lottery. The feelings of the people, not just me, everybody in that room was incredibly relieved. Wes Huntress rushes into that room, and he's crying beyond belief.
Thanks for trusting us, Wes.
Oh, you're kidding. You guys are great.
Tony and I hugged each other, both of us just tears rolling down our face. It was...
I knew you could do this, don't you? I says, well, I didn't know.
the young people in that room, they were all young. They all thanked me. And I just broke down. Just broke down. Couldn't deal with it.
We have imaging data.
When we landed and those first set of images came back, it was really exciting. We kind of stole the image out of the telemetry stream. I pulled up this little image on my monitor, this little black and white image, and before I knew it, the whole mission control was standing around looking at the, the little square black and white imagery.
More images began pouring in. There were lander self-portraits, images of the Sojourner. And then there was Mars.
What do you think, Mr. Geologist? Got any rocks there you'd like to go investigate?
Look at those rocks.
They really tackled some problems that nobody had ever done before. Many people said they couldn't do. And when it happened, they were just exuberant. And they should have been, because they had really accomplished a major step forward. They had really opened up a new future for exploration.
The accelerometers are reporting valid data.
It was so different, but the impact it had on America, I mean, it was enormous. People really were excited about the space program. So this was a major event in world history.
On the second day of operations, Sojourner slowly rambled off the lander and touched the surface of Mars. This small robot would capture the hearts and minds of people around the world, and the mission would become a record-breaking phenomenon on the brand new World Wide Web. Even the rocks in view became celebrities when they were given names like Barnacle Bill, Yogi, and Scooby-Doo, demonstrating that science could be fun. Scientists were elated with their findings too, especially for a mission originally conceived only as a technology demonstration. It was always known that the lander's battery would eventually fail. And on the 83rd Sol, as a day on Mars is called, the lander went silent. Sojourner, though, was still alive. The little rover, as she was pre-programmed to do, would have circled the lander, calling out to the mothership, listening for a reply that would never come. Eventually, as the Martian winter descended, Sojourner would be stilled too. By that time, Pathfinder had become a cultural icon, and it had succeeded in becoming the standard-bearer for the space agency's push for faster, better, cheaper missions. But more than once, the mission had skated near the edge of disaster. Was Pathfinder the path forward for planetary exploration? Or had it been an extraordinary, once-in-a-lifetime event undertaken by a very special group of people? The answer was not entirely clear. As for those two headstrong managers, Donna Shirley left JPL not long after Pathfinder. Tony Spear, having won his version of the lottery, retired. And many of the young Pathfinder mavericks went on to assume major leadership roles at JPL. They would be responsible for blazing new trails for future rovers that in the days to come would once again roam on Mars.